The Vikings went all in on Justin Jefferson. How does this impact the future of the NFC North? Stay tuned and find out.
Yeah, I've been wanting this shit forever. I've been in the field with whatever they throw at me. Brush it off, pick myself up, moving on to the better. Okay. Hey. Yeah. Ain't no errors, baby. It's a new era. I wake up early feeling rich like I'm cash.
Welcome in. Sounds Gouda, episode 8. Thank you all for coming back and listening to us, to our returning listeners, to any possible new listeners as well. We're excited to talk to you about all things Packers. And just know that every Thursday, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast, we do have new episodes. And so make sure to check us out. If you're on YouTube or one of those platforms like Spotify or Apple. So on this week, we're going to talk a little bit about some Justin Jefferson news from the Minnesota Vikings, some contract situations, stuff with the Packers, as well as some possible extensions and whatnot. So Jordan, dude, the Vikings just gave Justin Jefferson the bag. Do you think that was a good move? And would you do that if you were a GM?
The answer is no. Not at least for my current vision. If I was NFL GM or GM of the Packers, obviously we're talking about the rival Vikings here, and I wish them nothing but not success. If there's not a more elegant way of saying that.
All right, but hold on here. So he does what? Let's look at his stats. Doesn't he have the most receptions in his first couple of years? Do you think, okay, let's have this be switched? If the Packers had Justin Jefferson, I know completely different teams, completely different, ways of building rosters and whatnot, and you were the GM, and you had to make this tough decision. You had to either trade him, right? And I know this gets into a little bit of discussion, but what do you think that back and forth banter would be? It's an interesting way of going about it, and pros and cons to both, right?
Well, the fans, Justin Jefferson is the face of that franchise at the moment, right? They want to usher in J.J. McCarthy as that person, but they can't give him the keys to the castle quite yet. So, they can afford this simply because J.J. McCarthy is going to be on a rookie deal over the next 4 to 5 years if they exercise his fifth-year deal. There's not a lot of teams that are in a position to say that, right? So I think the Vikings are one of the few teams that could probably give the bag and reset the wide receiver market to a guy like Justin Jefferson. And from a fan's perspective, I think that makes sense for them. They don't have another face that they're going to pay and try to retain on their roster right now. Does that mean that's best for the success of their roster building beyond the next 2 seasons? I don't know. That's where I have some questions. I don't know. What do you think, Rob? Would you have done it?
Well, as a beloved Packer fan, obviously I've seen what we've been doing, and like the history of and the tradition of what we've done as well too with some wide receivers. Obviously when Devontae Adams was here, we were giving him top of the market, but it's really it's difficult. I can see doing it, right? He's one of the best wide receivers, if not the best. Now, granted, that's all going to depend on what Sam Darnold and J.J. McCarthy do this year, right? I think anybody is not going to disagree with that. But,
it's probably like Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase.
Tyreek Hill.
There's a small group, and Tyreek Hill is aging, right? For me, he's a guy I'm probably not giving this contract to now. I know he got paid 2 years ago, but getting a little long in the tooth for a $35 million a year deal for me.
All right, wait. So hold on here. The cheetah, Tyreek Hill, fastest guy, one of the fastest. I don't know if he is the fastest, so anybody here don't fact check me. But last year, back to fantasy football. We all know I like to bring this up at least one time on these podcasts. I drafted him with my first round pick. Dude, just a freaking stud. You wouldn't take Tyreek Hill on the team?
Tyreek Hill is going to be on the wrong side of 30 pretty soon. And one thing I know about speed is that speed does not last forever. You see a lot of these guys hit their shelf at about age 32. Tyreek Hill's 30 already. I'm probably not giving him a 4 or 5 year deal extension beyond this season, right? You're talking about spending $35 million a deal on a guy who's 33, 34 years old. You're probably not getting the best return on your investment in those seasons.
Yeah, so you might extend him, but it wouldn't be for a longer type of contract, right? And you're playing the age game, basically.
I think he's under contract for the next 2 years anyways,
Yeah,
which puts him
right.
at age 32.
Right.
And then I have serious questions about your fast twitch guys really being the same impact after that age. That's my philosophy though. So
yeah.
It's interesting though, this conversation, teams like the Chiefs, obviously with more success than the Packers so far, the Packers, teams have moved on from these guys. You talked about Tyreek Hill. They let him sign with the Dolphins. The Chiefs have obviously
won a Super Bowl.
Been in and won Super Bowls instead of giving Tyreek Hill the bag. So I think that's the point of this, right? Are you gonna, with the cost of wide receivers, which is now becoming the second most expensive position in football, do you give it to one guy? I know that we had some offline chat that you can shut one guy down with the right cornerback. We've seen Jair neutralize Justin Jefferson, completely take him out of the game before. So, then who else are you throwing the ball to? I guess fortunately for the Vikings, they probably feel pretty good about Jordan Addison. But they just lost KJ Osborne. And then I don't really know who they have. I know we kind of covered their roster a few weeks ago. But nobody else is really coming to mind that is that third threat for them right now. And TJ Hawkinson is...
That's where I was going to go, TJ.
But he's going to, miss the first few weeks of the season, if not the first half of the season.
Right.
So, I don't know.
Okay. So, like, the Chiefs won it last year, right? Rashee Rice. I think they did end up... Well, they had McCole Hardman, right? But he was with the Jets, right, for the first handful of games, and then they signed him. He got the game-winning touchdown, at the end for what it's worth. I won them the Super Bowl, right? So they basically did that, with giving away Tyreek Hill. So they've shown that they can have it with top-tier quarterback play, right? You look at the Packers from 2010, 2011, just loaded, right? Everywhere. Tight end, wide receiver, spreading the ball around. I think actually the only game they ended up losing that year, right, before they lost to the Giants in the playoffs, was against the Chiefs. So I would like to take more swings, get more draft capital. Now, this is totally biased. Totally understand. Love what the Packers do. Love how they operate. I'm fully bought in. But I can see also too on the other side as well. Like, look at, it hasn't really panned out really well too much for the Titans, right? That all depends on how Will Levis does this year. And I know they just got Calvin Ridley, and he's a speedster, right? So he's going to be really good. But like the Eagles traded for AJ Brown. I think they just signed him to a 3-year, $32 million average, $96 million total. And they went to a Super Bowl. Now, granted, they didn't win, but he was really impactful in doing that for them. And I know they had really good play from Hurts, have one of the best offensive lines. We'll see this year without Jason Kelce as the center, et cetera. But so there's some of this back and forth. Like, they did it. They went to a Super Bowl. Chiefs gave away their top wide receiver, went to the Super Bowl and won it, right? So it's interesting back and forth.
Yeah, and I think people are going to listen to this and you're like, well, you wouldn't have given, that number one wide receiver that contract. So does that mean that you would have moved on from Devontae Adams? The answer is no to that. And the reason is you were projecting that you were entering the last 2 or 3 seasons of Aaron Rodgers' era in Green Bay. I think that's just a totally different season of NFL fandom for where we're at. Obviously, we're a young, rebuilding, ready to go contending team in 2024 and beyond, hopefully. But you keep a guy like that on the roster, to make sure that Aaron Rodgers gets into the Super Bowl. And there's been a lot of criticism for that, right? We didn't get Aaron Rodgers something additional to Devontae Adams that would have pushed us over the edge. So I certainly see, the conflict there. But here we are, 1 year removed from a down season, moving on. Well, 2 years now, but it was really last year was the rebound, right? So really only a 1 year hiatus. And now we're all really excited about the receiving core and plethora of weapons that we have all over the offensive side of the ball. So, a couple other interesting things in this conversation, right? The Packers, especially last week, they were linked in a Bleacher Report article to CeeDee Lamb, podcasters, and conversation all over Twitter's. Would we get T. Higgins? The problem is, for me, why I hate those particular type of moves. I mean, I think it's one thing to retain your own guy, but when you have to give up serious draft capital, a great player and a pick, 2 premium top 100 picks, plus you got to pay the $35 million, plus, I'm out on that altogether. So CeeDee Lamb can stay in Dallas or go somewhere else. T. Higgins can stay in Cincinnati or go somewhere else. I'm fine without those moves.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And you see some success with it in some other areas, some other teams that haven't had quite as much success, right? So the Cowboys, look at their specific situation right now. You just alluded to that, CeeDee Lamb, depending on what they do with that, and Dax. I got to think his impending contract. I don't know what else they would do. The Saints, I think they're still in a lost black hole from what they did from a few years back, right? So you see 2 teams specifically like that. Now, I know the Cowboys had a really good year last year, and granted, everyone was thinking they were going to beat the Packers and they were going to make a run to the Super Bowl. This was their year. Every year is supposed to be their year, right? By the way. But like our dreaded nemesis, at least one of them, besides the other NFC North rivals, the 49ers, they have what? So they lost in 2024, Eric Armstead. They went out last year and they traded Chase Young. I don't know exactly what they gave up for him. I think it was a couple of really good picks. 2025, Jordan, right? They have Dre Greenlaw, you have the whole stuff going on right now with Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. They did go out and draft a Ricky Purcell, Ricky P. I'll call him Ricky P.
We're still working on that whole names thing on this podcast.
Yeah, for sure. Just always nailing that. But from Florida, right, to I would think with their first round pick, was it a first round or was it a second round?
I think it was a late first on Ricky Purcell.
Yeah. Yeah, but okay, so that's my point, right? We're out there to get him a rookie contract to be able to deal with whatever they're going to end up doing with Ayuk and Samuel. They can't pay everybody. And then 2026, right? You got Deebo Samuel, Kittle, Juszczyk, and then what the heck do you do with Brock Purdy? So this will be his 3rd season, right? And then next year he's going to have some contract talks. You cannot pay everybody, right? And they already had a few really impactful losses in Eric Armstead. I think he went to the Jaguars, and then Chase Young signing with the Saints, which you can talk what you want about Chase Young, about his effort and play style, but did play a little bit better in the Super Bowl and made a couple really good plays, which almost led them to winning it. So it's just like how you see the 49ers doing it, giving up all this ton of draft capital and different stuff to get these few players. And I do think I'm already answering my own question that because you're not having to pay Brock Purdy, that you're being able to make that work. But the time is coming. Stuff is due. People want to get paid. Mm-hmm. How do they continue to stay relevant?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think that obviously the 49ers have been the top team in the NFC for the last couple of years. A lot of that is due to their coaching, the superstar supporting cast that they have on offense around Brock Purdy. But I do see that they will have to pay a few guys, but unfortunately, I'm really confident in the way the Niners do business. I see the Niners and the Packers approaching their offseason plan and roster building in different ways, but also I think they have really smart GMs, really smart guys in those buildings for succession planning. You look like, I guess the question is, Rob, that I have for you is like take the 49ers out of it. But would you rather be in a Super Bowl every 5 or 6 years, or be one of these teams like the Cowboys, or, we saw, we've seen some of these teams reset. Who was I watching in Super Bowl highlights the other day? I mean, it's really cyclical, right? Would you rather go all in every 5 or 6 years to have a 1 or 2 window and be crap for 2 or 3 seasons? Or would you rather be a team like the Packers or somebody else that builds a consistent winner? They're willing to make tough business decisions, maybe have a chance to win their division every year, but kind of be criticized for maybe not going all in, right? I think it's like we've got, in a 15-year window, we've got like 10 or 11 bites or chances at the apple to win that championship, versus every 5 years I'm going to go all in, and I feel really confident about doing that. I mean, what do you think about those philosophies, Rob?
Yeah, I'm all for what the Packers are doing, drafting and developing. Alluded to it earlier, but taking more players, developing them. Really love what they did last year. Now, if you were to tell me 8 games through the season how it's going, I would say I was really miserable, along with all the rest of the Packers fans. And especially Jordan, after he went to go see the home game at Lambeau against the Vikings, and arguably Jordan Love's worst game of the year. So
that was a low spot in my, I've never given up, but that was a true moment riding home from that game where I was like, all right.
How depressed were you?
Really depressed. I mean, not like, there's 2 different types of depression, right? There was like that post 49ers playoff loss after we didn't know if Aaron Rodgers was going to return, and we're like, we have no clue what Jordan Love looks like, and walking out of the stadium there with the 49ers fans a little fat and happy and cocky. I mean, that was a miserable experience walking out of that game. But walking out of that Vikings game, and you're like, okay, this is the future. Now we've seen this. Maybe this is a known commodity, and maybe it looks like it's going to be rough for a few years. That was tough, but obviously we know the story. They turned it around. We've had a lot of enthusiasm on this podcast, and we're feeling pretty good. So, yeah, I like the Packers strategy. It's funny, though. You've got teams that are going to go all in, and you've got teams that are going to build for continual success. And then you have the Bears, which can't seem to do either. So,
yeah, well, right too, and I hate to admit it, but I think they might have done something right for this year. Well, it all depends on how Caleb Williams does, But Keenan Allen, if he can stay healthy, it will be a really good veteran wide receiver for them, especially, being the caretaker, whatever, for. Roma Dunze out of Washington. They still have DJ Moore and Cole Kmet, all depending on their offensive line. I know we talked about this in other podcasts, right? But Shane Waldron, as the quarterback coach, he helped develop and get Geno Smith paid. So we'll see what ends up happening with the Bears. I mean, their total for the year is 8.5. So the market and the sports gurus, betting gurus, are thinking that they might be somewhat type of competent. But yeah, historically they've failed multiple times. And I feel like they've made some good strategic moves, but it all just depends on how it plays out on the field and how Caleb Williams does.
So speaking of roster building, right? We talked last pod about having $30 million plus in cap space. I mean, I'm looking at what can we do with that money, and I'm struggling to figure out how we're going to spend that this season. I mean, what do you think, Rob? You got any ideas of where we're going to spend that money?
No, I don't. It's hard to say, 30 million now, right? Or somewhere around there now after the Devondre Campbell post June 1st release. So I don't know. Um, it'll be interesting to see what they do. Obviously, how they put out Jordan Love's extension. I know that Brian Gutekunst was just on, I think, 97.3 of the game and said that, his typical GM speak, that they were talking. They both want a contract done. Packers want it reasonable based on, a half year sample size, basically, of really, really good play. And then, his camp and whatnot, especially after the Goff deal, is like, dude, if Goff is getting 53 mil, there's no way in hell that Jordan Love is not at least getting that. But you could do that in multiple different ways. 20 million split over 4 years, right, lowers that cap from 55 to 50 for future seasons. You got other players like Kenny Clark, coming up here on an extension. And we were just talking before we got on this, like, I thought Kenny Clark was like 30, 31, 32. This is, just how much we get into this stuff where I'm like, damn, that dude is still young. He's 28, turning 29, in this
in October, right?
In October.
And he's coming off a Pro Bowl year. I mean, there's still a lot of juice there. And just to clarify your thoughts about that Love extension, right? I mentioned on the last pod, I'm still trying to figure out what are our avenues to spend money on this year's cap that reduces the future cap hits, right? And I've been searching and combing, and maybe somebody out there that's really like a cap expert, maybe Russ Ball, maybe you can, get at me and give me the answer here on X.
Get on it, Russ Ball.
But I think the only way that I know for sure that we could take available cap space this year and say, for example, put it into a Jordan Love contract to save on annual value for the future would be to essentially rip up this year's contract and sign new, right? So if we were going to give him a 4-year extension, now we're talking about ripping up this year's contract and making it a 5-year deal where essentially take his $13 million, add $20 million to that. So essentially now year one is a $33 million deal, thus reducing your cap hit, I guess, in the aggregate, in the fake way over the next 4 seasons, right? So the total money's there, but it lowers it to maybe from 55 to, down to about $50 million a year, but they can put that in a signing bonus. He can secure his financial security for the next 5 years. I don't know if he'll do that. My guess is he's going to want to maximize his value and add 4 or 5 years of that 55 million onto that. So maybe it becomes a 6-year deal. And it works out for everybody, right? But I don't know the other cap tricks right now, and that would be the same thing with Kenny Clark. I think they should extend him based on his season last year. He had 7.5 sacks, but we'd be talking about the same cap tricks, like if they rip up his contract and try to move some money into this year. I don't know if that's a viable thing. I'm looking at the free agent list. I'm not seeing anybody that makes sense for the Packers right now. So, you've got Stephon Gilmore. Gouda said over and over, we feel great about our cornerback room. Justin Simmons, I think we certainly would have signed him if we wanted another veteran safety. So I don't think we're going that route.
Dude, the only one on here I could be like, ooh, I would test that out for a year. Calais Campbell, the ageless wonder.
Yeah, and I mean,
that's intriguing.
It is, but I think that we have so many guys, young guys up front. I think we're going to continue to ride this youth movement. If JJ Kingsley Enagbare would have been hurt, as we maybe initially suspected, I could see that move, or Emmanuel Ogbah. But I don't see anybody that intrigues me, right? So I don't know. The short answer is I still don't know what they're going to do with that $30 million, other than maybe this will be finally the year at the trade deadline that Gouda goes out and adds that. What did the Rams do a couple years ago? They added Odell Beckham Jr. They added Von Miller. They went out and they won that Super Bowl with Matt Stafford. So this year, there's finally, we've had conversation in the past. We haven't had the cap space to really be a big market at the trade deadline. maybe this is the year that happens.
Yeah, you never know. Might be a good year for it too. And you're right too. Like a lot of these people that's currently on the free agent list, you just don't know how that's all going to pan out. You got some players coming up too here, like Watson and Dobbs, right? Not till 2026. And we'll see what Watson does this year as well. But here in the next few years is really going to be our prime time window as well too. So I don't know. I can't have my magic 8 ball and be able to be like, oh yeah, this is exactly what the Packers are going to do. All depends on injuries, what happens throughout the season, where's the best value, what teams are, willing to deal with certain such players. You see it every year come around. It's always a handful of teams. You're like, oh, well, that didn't pan out the way that they thought. I think like the New York Giants, right? Who have had up and down seasons, and we'll see how Daniel Jones comes back. And I know they got Malik Neighbors now for this year for Jones to throw the ball to, and there's a lot of hype with them around their OTAs. Always is. Speak of the Bears, right? But it's hard to say exactly what'll happen. But
I just would have never given Danny Dimes that kind of money, right? I'd be interested. Put Danny Dimes on the 49ers, and is he the same type of player that Brock Purdy is? I don't know in terms of decision making or what, but I'd be interested to see. Put Danny Dimes, Daniel Jones on the Niners. Do you get the same result? If you put Brock Purdy on the Giants, I mean, what does he look like?
Right. Last year, absolutely not. Well, and he got injured too, right? So, but the year before, and when the Packers played them in England, they looked good. They looked really good. Did they make the playoffs that year?
Yeah, I think they did. They were a better squad, right? But obviously they're going through a huge transition. I mean, they let arguably their best defensive player walk to our benefit. Xavier McKinney is now a Packer. But yeah, not to spend too much time on the Giants, but just other interesting contract extension. And, do you pay a guy? Do you not pay a guy? You really need to be confident in your decision because it can have ripple effects for years. So, but yeah, just moving on to some closing notes. I mean, I hope you enjoyed this discussion. I think I could sit around and talk roster construction and salary cap, and I'm really intrigued by that. I mean, if I could retire from my job and do anything, I think I would love to be an NFL GM. I spend way too much time thinking about these things and hypothetical moves and what the salary cap looks like in 2026. But a couple other things. Been a lot of hype or conversation around teams wearing green in Brazil, which the NFL sends the two teams that have the most green in their uniform to play in Brazil. But I think
Green Bay Packers. It's literally in the name.
That's right. If you know about Packers history, that's not necessarily why we wear green. We can get into that in another episode, but very interesting conversation. I think that there's a lot of debunking of that myth out there right now. Essentially, it comes down to some soccer rivalries and some soccer gangs. But there's some good stuff out there on Instagram, on Twitter, some locals that are saying, hey, this is getting blown out of proportion. You don't have to fear for your safety. We're welcoming and excited for the NFL and the teams that are coming. And you know what, this little spoiler, but we might have some more conversation about this coming up in an upcoming pod. Maybe hopefully from a little bit more credible source than us. But I'm not going to share too much more about that at this point in time. And then I know, Rob, you wanted to really, talk about the Packers, vibes right now. There's a lot of conversation about that, but, I'm feeling good about where the team's at. What do you think?
Yeah, vibes seem really good. just the talk in the locker room, it's a night and day difference. So that's really good. They're having really good connections. They're almost getting 100% at OTA participants, including our beloved Jair Alexander, who seems to have a different type of mindset and character this year. At least that's the way it comes off in his interviews. He's not wearing giant hats and giant glasses. Seems a little bit more polished and approached and to what exactly he is and is not answering. Might have gotten a little PR talk on some of that stuff as far as, put your good play on the field, be a good team player. Not that he wasn't from before, but we all know that captain situation from last year in Carolina. So, vibes are looking good. I cannot wait till training camp. Can't wait for this Jordan Love extension to happen. It'll give us some more really good content to talk about for a few weeks on that too. So vibes are good right now, but it's also, we're in the dead season of the NFL until training camp starts. So just excited to watch all the news and the information for them.
But yeah, Rob, as you said, we got more content coming out every Thursday. We're going to work our hardest to keep this conversation interesting from you or for you until we see football on the field again, right? Yep. Whether that's in training camp, preseason, or, I think we're like 90 days out right now from the regular season. I cannot wait, right? So, thanks again, everybody, for listening. If you're enjoying this conversation, make sure to share with your friends, your family, other Packers fans. If you guys are watching on YouTube, please make sure to hit that subscribe button, comment, like, let us know what you think. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please make sure to follow us. So connect with us on X. Rob can be added at Robbers79, and myself, Olson Jord. You'll see, if you're watching YouTube, you'll see that spelled out in the banner below. So thanks again, everybody. And until next time, Packers fans, have a Gouda morning, a Gouda afternoon, and a Gouda night. See you later.
See you guys.
Been wanted this shit forever. I've been in the field with whatever they throw at me. Brush it off, pick myself up, moving on to the better. Okay. Hey.